fantasy fans, it's your best friend Cam Stewart from HotRoster today with our weekly wide receivers preview. It's time for Week 9. And yes, it's another bye-heavy week. Guys like Larry Fitzgerald, A.J. Green, DeAndre Hopkins, and Alshon Jeffrey all off this Sunday. So let's take a look at the best and worst options for the week. This season, the numbers just haven't been there for Jarvis Landry of the Dolphins. Sure, if you're in a PPR league, you might still be loving this guy. He has 7+ catches in 5 games this season, but he only has 1 score, and it came in one of his 2 games where he topped 100 yards. But with any slump this season, there's nothing like playing the Jets, Jets. That'll be a recipe to get out of it. Unfortunately for New York fans, in case they didn't know it already, Revis Island is officially closed. Wideouts have caught almost 70% of their targets when facing Darrelle Revis. I'd expect Landry to be the one to line up across him. Plus, also look for Landry to be heavily targeted. He has seen at least 8 targets in 6 of his last 7 starts. The Jets have also given up 100 yards receiving the last 2 weeks to players like Terrell Pryor and Mike Wallace, guys who are similar in terms of size and role to Landry. So I expect Jarvis to go off against the Jets. I'm starting him in fantasy, and I'm picking him up on HotRoster. Speaking of players who've had a tough season, Dante Moncrief of the Colts certainly hasn't had it easy this year. The 23-year-old was a breakout candidate for many fantasy experts, but during his second game of the season, he fractured his shoulder blade, which derailed his year for the time being. But now he's back, and he came back with a vengeance last week. Moncrief only caught 4 of his 9 targets, but one of them was for a score, plus those 9 targets were the most out of any Colts player. And I wouldn't expect this to be any different this week, given that T.Y. Hilton's status for Sunday's game is questionable against the Packers. I expect Moncrief to find pay dirt again this weekend and show us why he's considered such a solid pick this year. I'm pressing down big time on Moncrief to have a huge day against the Pack in Lambeau. Another player who's had an underwhelming season so far is Kelvin Benjamin of the Panthers. These last few weeks have been a tough stretch for the Florida State product. He hasn't scored since week 3, and he hasn't topped 10 fantasy points since week 2. That's brutal. That has led to a 6.6 fantasy point average for Benjamin over his last 5 games with only 1 score there. But again, there's nothing like a juicy matchup and a very inviting pass D to turn it all around. And this week, Benjamin and the Panthers strike gold against the Rams. In their last 5 games, LA has given up 8 touchdowns to go along with 196 yards to wide receivers through the air. And given the generous nature of this Rams pass D, I'm expecting Benjamin to break out of his slump, score a touchdown, and have a big day in fantasy. With the right matchup on HotRoster, I'm taking Kelvin Benjamin for the W. Along with Dante Moncrief, one of the most talked about players coming into the season was Marvin Jones of the Lions. The former Bengal arrived in Detroit with big-time expectations, and you know what? He met them all through the first 3 weeks of the season, where he notched 403 yards receiving and 2 scores. Since then, though, Jones has regressed significantly, combining for only 253 yards in his last 5 games. That's only about 50 yards a game. And unfortunately for Jones, things are only going to get more difficult this week when he faces an angry Vikings team. Minnesota has only allowed 4 touchdowns to wideouts all season long, and they only give up just over 112 yards on average combined to opposing wideouts. I just can't see Jones getting around them. I think the Purple People Eaters are going to chew this guy up and spit him out. I'm pressing down against Jones on HotRoster. Mike Wallace of the Baltimore Ravens has been one of those gems for his fantasy owners. A guy you would have most likely drafted late has given you more than you could have asked for. I mean, Wallace has combined for 217 yards in 2 games before Baltimore's bye, and this week he gets his old team, the Pittsburgh Steelers, an opponent he's probably been salivating to play against. My concern for Wallace this week is the matchup, though. The Steelers' pass defense have arguably been the best in the NFL. They've only allowed 3 touchdowns all season, and on average they give up 17 points to opposing wideouts, which is 4th fewest in the league. So despite revenge being on Wallace's mind, I don't think he'll follow through on it. I expect the Steeler curtains to come down crashing on him. I'm sitting Mike Wallace this week on HotRoster. Lastly, we end on Amari Cooper of the Oakland Raiders. And you know what, folks? I love this guy. How could you not? Cooper currently ranks as the number 6 wide receiver in fantasy, despite only having 2 scores on the season. Thankfully for owners, Cooper has crushed it when it comes to receiving yards, as his 787 are good for 3rd in the NFL. But I think this week, the good times stop rolling in Oakland, if only for 1 week. The Silver and Black are home to the Denver Broncos, and I'd expect Cooper to be matched up against with one of the best cornerbacks in the game, Chris Harris Jr. Cooper did put up a dud in Week 7 when he faced upcoming star Jalen Ramsey of the Jacksonville Jaguars. With Harris Jr. being an established guy, I think he limits Cooper's big play potential and holds him in check. So despite loving this guy, I'm not loving him this week. I'm actually picking against Cooper on HotRoster. Well, that's it, my fantasy friends. Make sure to check out HotRoster today with me and the Encyclopedia Gary and Thorne every weekday at 4:30, and then take that information we're giving you to win on HotRoster. I'm Cam Stewart for the Fantasy Sports Network, and I'll see you on the virtual gridiron.